She thought losing her father was the worst day of her life. She was wrong. She found out the same week she buried her father. The man she had been married to for 14 years, the man who held her hand at the funeral, who told her everything was going to be okay, had already called a lawyer, and the woman he was leaving her for was her best friend. But here is where this story stops being about a divorce. 3 days after her husband served her those papers, Diana Caldwell sat across from 3 attorneys she had never met in a conference room she had never been in and was handed a single sheet of paper. On that paper was a number: $2,347,000,000. Her father's name, Henry Caldwell. Her father, who drove a 7-year-old Ford truck, who ate lunch at a diner every Tuesday, who told her every time she asked that he was doing fine. That man was worth $2.3 billion, and he had never told a single soul. 3, about a man who built a fortune so large that he spent the last decade of his life hiding it from the very people who loved him. About a husband who married a woman while already planning his exit. About a best friend who smiled across 20 years of trust and called it friendship. And about a woman who, when she finally learned the truth about her father, her husband, and the life she thought she had, became someone none of them were prepared. Before we go back to the beginning, there are 3 questions I want you to hold in your mind for the entire length of this video, because each one has an answer, and each answer is more shocking than the last. But before I ask that question, please do well to heat that sore scribing boating and like and share, and do not forget to tell us where you are watching from. Question 1. Why did Henry Caldwell, a man worth over $2 billion, go to his grave without telling his only daughter who he really was? Was it shame? Was it fear? Was it something he knew about the people around her that she didn't? Question 2. How long had her husband, Marcus, been planning to leave her? Because by the time you hear the answer, you will not believe you did not see it coming. I almost didn't. And question 3, and this is the one that changes everything. What did Diana find inside her father's private files that she was never, ever supposed to find? The answer to that question is what turned a story about betrayal into something else entirely. Stay with me. To understand all of it, you have to go back, way back, to a small town in Wayne County, Ohio, 1978. A young man with $12 in his pocket and an idea, Henry James Caldwell, was born in 1952 in Wooster, Ohio. His father worked the line at a rubber plant. His mother cleaned houses 3 days a week. They were not poor exactly. They just never had enough. Henry understood that distinction early. Not poor, just never enough. And he decided, before he was 15 years old, that he would spend the rest of his life making sure that was never true again. That would he started his first business at 22. A small parts supplier for the auto industry. 6 employees, a rented warehouse, and a reputation for never missing a deadline. That business became 3 businesses. 3 became a holding company. By 1995, Henry Caldwell's private equity firm had interests in manufacturing, real estate, and regional logistics across 6 Midwestern states. But here is what is remarkable about all of this. Nobody knew. Henry Caldwell was not famous. He did not want to be famous. He had watched what visibility did to men like him, the lawsuits, the government scrutiny, the distant relatives suddenly remembering they existed. So he made a decision that very few people with that kind of money ever make. He stayed invisible. Everything. Henry had 1 daughter. Diana Marie Caldwell, born 1979. Her mother, Henry's wife, Carol, died of cancer when Diana was 11 years old. And from that point on, it was just the 2 of them. People who knew Henry in those years say he was different with Diana, warmer, more patient than anyone who worked for him would recognize. He drove her to school every morning until she was old enough to drive herself. He attended every one of her teaching recitals, she played piano, until she went to college. He was, by every account, a man who loved his daughter absolutely. He just could never figure out how to tell her the truth about who he was. And so he kept the secret, year after year, even as it grew larger than anything he had planned. Henry had a saying. He said it to his attorneys, his partners, his accountant. He never said it to Diana, but she would find it years later written in his own handwriting on the inside cover of a leather notebook. It said, "Money that is seen becomes a target. Money that is invisible becomes a fortress. Build the fortress." He had been building it his entire life, and without knowing it, he had been building it for her. Diana Caldwell grew up comfortable, not wealthy, or so she believed, just comfortable. Her father paid for college, paid for grad school. She became a teacher, middle school English, 8 years in the Columbus public school system. Then she moved into nonprofit work, executive director of a literacy organization serving rural communities in central Ohio. She was not someone who thought about money much. She drove a practical car. She rented until she was 38. She donated a percentage of her salary every year to causes she believed in. People who worked with Diana describe her the same way, almost universally: warm, principled, utterly without pretense. She was her father's daughter. She just didn't know how much. Diana had known Morgan Ellis since they were 22. They met at a volunteer orientation for a food bank on a rainy Saturday in Columbus. Morgan had shown up to the wrong address, and Diana had walked her to the right one. 20 years of friendship started with someone being lost. They were different in almost every way. Diana was steady, methodical, slow to trust. Morgan was spontaneous, social, fast with a laugh. But they fit each other, the way some friendships just do. Morgan was in the room when Diana's mother died. Diana was in the delivery room when Morgan had her first child. They talked every day, sometimes 3 times. They had the kind of friendship where you don't need to explain yourself because the other person already knows, or so Diana believed. But there is one thing about Morgan that Diana noticed at the time, but never thought to question. Morgan had met Henry Caldwell only a handful of times. Henry was private, reserved, not much for socializing. But somehow Morgan always seemed to know more about Henry's business than Diana did. Once, she asked Diana, out of nowhere over coffee, whether Henry had ever talked about estate planning. Diana thought it was just Morgan being Morgan. Curious. Overly practical. She thought nothing of it. She would think of it later. She would think of very little else. Marcus Alderman, 47 years old at the time of these events, financial advisor, former college lacrosse player, still looked the part. Diana met Marcus at a charity gala in 2009. He was working the room. That is the only way to describe it. And he was the kind of man who made everyone he spoke to feel like the most important person in the room. Diana, who was not easily impressed, found herself impressed. They dated for 2 years. Married in 2011. By all external appearances, it was a good marriage. They were well matched in the ways that are visible. They traveled. They entertained. They had the same friends, including Morgan. Actually, it was Marcus who had introduced Diana to Morgan at that same charity gala 8 years before. But people who knew Marcus well, colleagues, former clients, one ex from before Diana, describe a different picture. A man who was always calculating, always aware of what the room could do for him. One former colleague said, and I am not embellishing this, Marcus had a gift for knowing what something was worth before he ever said hello. He was good at his job, but he was better at the version of his job that happened before any contract was signed. The version where you assess the asset, understand the structure, figure out the angles. He had done it with clients for years. It turns out he had been doing it in his marriage as well. What Marcus had figured out, and this is something that took Diana years to fully understand, was that Henry Caldwell was not just a businessman. Henry Caldwell was wealthy, very, very wealthy. and Diana was his only heir. Of this happened. There are two things Henry Caldwell noticed about Marcus that Diana never knew about. The first, in 2017, Marcus asked Henry, once, over a dinner that Diana had not attended, whether he had considered setting up a family trust structure. Henry said he would think about it. He did not pursue it with Marcus. He pursued it with his own attorneys the following week. The second, in 2019, Marcus recommended a wealth management firm that specialized in high net worth estate transfers. He framed it as a suggestion for Henry. Henry looked into the firm. He found that Marcus had a referral arrangement with them, a financial arrangement. Henry filed both of these details in his private notebook, the same notebook where he kept his philosophy about the fortress. He never confronted Marcus. He just started building the walls. By the time Henry Caldwell was diagnosed with the heart condition that would eventually kill him, he had been quietly preparing for 2 years. And he had restructured his estate. He had hired a private investigator. He had written a letter. He had not told Diana any of it, because Henry Caldwell believed in building the fortress first, and then letting the people you loved find safety inside. Henry Caldwell died on a Tuesday morning, March the 14th. He was at home, in the kitchen, making coffee. The medical examiner's report said it was a massive cardiac event, instantaneous. He did not suffer. He was 71 years old. Diana was at her desk at the literacy nonprofit when her cell phone rang. The number was her father's landline. It was not her father calling. It was his neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Ruth, who had a spare key and checked on Henry every Tuesday morning. Diana told a friend later that she knew before she answered. And she said there is a frequency to some phone calls that you can feel before you pick up. She picked up. She drove to her father's house. She has said she does not remember the drive. 40 minutes on the highway. She remembers pulling into the driveway. She remembers the neighbor, Ruth, standing on the porch with her arms crossed the way people stand when they are waiting and do not know what else to do with their hands. She remembers walking past Ruth into the kitchen. The coffee maker had finished its cycle. The pot was full. Henry had set out 1 mug. Just one. She poured herself a cup. She stood in her father's kitchen and drank it. She said later that it felt like the right thing to do, like something he would have wanted. And then she sat down and she cried the funeral was small. Henry had requested it that way. 31 people. A church he had attended occasionally in the town where he grew up. Diana gave the eulogy. She talked about Tuesday lunches, about the Ford truck, about a man who thought actions were more honest than words. She did not know, standing at that podium, that she was describing a man she had only partially met. There were 3 things at that funeral that Diana noticed and filed away without fully understanding. First, 3 men in expensive suits she did not recognize standing near the back. They did not approach her. They watched. Second, Marcus was on his phone twice during the service. He stepped outside both times. Third, Morgan wept at the funeral more than Diana had ever seen her weep at anything. At the time, Diana thought Morgan was grieving for her. She would later revise that interpretation entirely. A long time. In the 3 days following the funeral, Diana did what people do. She answered condolence calls. She sorted through her father's mail. She found a box of old photographs and spent an evening going through them, trying to remember what she knew about her father and realizing the file was thinner than she thought. On the morning of the 4th day, her cell phone rang. The number was a law firm. Not any law firm she recognized. Not her father's accountant. Not anyone she had ever dealt with. The woman on the phone introduced herself as a partner at Caldwell Estate Holdings, LLC. She said, "Ms. Caldwell, your father asked us to contact you at this time. We represent his estate. We would like to meet with you as soon as possible. And Ms. Caldwell, your father, Diana Caldwell, drove to the law firm alone." Now Marcus had insisted on coming. He said she should not be handling complex estate matters by herself this soon after losing her father. He said he could help. He said that was what husbands were for. Diana had told him she would be fine. She parked her car, straightened her coat, and walked through the glass doors of a law firm she had never heard of into a chapter of her life she had not known was coming. That you come alone. There were 3 attorneys waiting for her in a conference room on the 14th floor. The lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Cho, senior partner, introduced herself and her 2 colleagues. There was water on the table. There were no pleasantries. Patricia Cho opened a leather portfolio and placed a single sheet of paper face down on the table in front of Diana. She said, "Ms. Caldwell, before I turn this over, I need you to understand that what you are about to see represents your father's estate as it currently stands." Diana said she understood. Patricia Cho turned the paper over. The number on that page was this: $2,347,000,000 net, after taxes, after holdings, after obligations. Diana stared at that number for a long time. Patricia Cho said later that she had never seen anyone sit with that kind of information that quietly. Most people react, one way or another. They cry, they ask questions, they say something. Diana said nothing for 45 seconds. Then she looked up at Patricia Cho and said, "How?" Patricia Cho spent the next 40 minutes explaining the structure of Henry Caldwell's fortune. "I'm going to give you the relevant version." Patricia Cho spent the next 40 minutes explaining the structure of Henry Caldwell's fortune. "I'm going to give you the relevant version." Henry had built his wealth across 4 holding entities, none of which bore his name publicly. Each entity was structured to minimize visibility. The combined portfolio included industrial manufacturing assets across 3 states, worth approximately $900 million, commercial real estate holdings in rural and suburban Ohio, worth approximately $640 million, private equity positions in 11 companies, worth approximately $560 million, and a cash reserve position in a private banking structure in Zurich, worth approximately $247 million. Henry Caldwell had been building this for 43 years. He had never hired a public relations firm. He had never given an interview. He had never appeared on a list. He had simply built, quietly, and then built some more. Diana had one question after all of that. Not, "What does this mean for me?" Not, "What happens now?" she asked. "Did my mother know?" Patricia Cho paused. Then she said, "Yes, Carol knew. She was named in the original trust structure before she passed. Your father restructured everything after her death. He never added another name. Until now." Diana sat with that for a moment. Her mother had known. Her mother had carried that secret too, for years. And together, her parents had decided that Diana would live her life without the weight of knowing what she was worth. She was angry about that. She has been honest about saying so. But she also understood it. Eventually, in the way that you understand something after you have been angry about it for long enough. Patricia Cho then said something that Diana had not anticipated. She said, "Ms. Caldwell, there is one more document. Your father prepared it personally. He asked that you read it alone. We will leave the room. Take as much time as you need." Patricia Cho and her 2 colleagues stood up and left the conference room. The door closed. Diana was alone at the 14th floor table with a sealed envelope that had her name on it in her father's handwriting. She recognized his handwriting. She sat with that envelope in her hands for a full minute before she opened it. The letter was 4 pages long, handwritten. Henry Caldwell's handwriting, small, neat, slightly cramped. The handwriting of a man who thought before he put pen to paper. It began like this: "Diana, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I am sorry for the manner of this delivery. I know it is not the conversation we should have had. I should have had it with you years ago. I did not, because I was afraid. Not of what you would think of the money, but of what you would think of me for keeping it from you. I hope, by the time you finish reading this, you will understand why I did. I hope you will not hate me for it. I do not think you will. You are your mother's daughter as much as mine. She always said you had her patience. I always thought you had her heart. I hope I am right. I believe I am. Then came the part Diana was not prepared for. Henry wrote, I need to tell you something about Marcus. I need you to read this part carefully, and I need you to finish it before you react. Can you do that for me? I believe you can. In 2019, I became concerned about certain patterns of behavior I had observed in Marcus. Specifically, his interest in my financial affairs. It went beyond the curiosity of a concerned son-in-law. It was structured, methodical, persistent. I hired a private investigator. His name is Gerald Fowler. His report is attached to this letter. Please read all of it. I want to tell you what the report found before you read it, so that you are not reading it alone. Marcus has been meeting with Morgan Ellis outside of your knowledge. These meetings began in 2020. Mr. Fowler documented 17 of them. Marcus consulted a divorce attorney for the first time in October of 2021. He consulted the same attorney again in March of 2022, and a third time in January of this year. I believe Marcus married you with genuine feeling. I want you to know I believe that. But I also believe that when he understood what this estate might mean, and he has understood it for years, Diana, longer than you have known, he made a calculation. And that calculation has been running ever since. Henry continued, I have not told you any of this because I did not want to make your choice for you. That is your right. It has always been your right. But I have done what I could to protect you if you needed protecting. Patricia Cho and her team have structured the estate in a manner that will be explained to you in full. The short version is this. Nothing in this estate can be accessed, claimed, or divided for 90 days following my death. On the 91st day, the full estate transfers irrevocably to you alone. No joint claim, no marital property claim, no mechanism by which any other party can access what I have built. I do not know if Marcus will act on what I believe he is planning. I do not know if you will need this protection, but I built the fortress. That is what I know how to do. I built it for you. I hope you never have to use it. And if you do, I hope it is enough. The letter ended this way. I want to say one more thing. I know you may be angry with me about the money, about Marcus, about the years I could have told you and did not. Be angry. You are entitled to it. I deserve some of it. But when you are done being angry, I want you to do one thing for me. I want you to look at the foundation documents in the third folder that Patricia has for you. Do not look at them yet. Wait until you are ready. When you are ready, look at them. And then you will understand why I built all of it and who I built it for. I love you. I have loved you since before you were old enough to know what that meant. I love you still. Your father. For 23 minutes after finishing the letter. Then she called her husband. Marcus answered on the second ring. Hey, how is it going? Do you need me to come? Diana said, No, I am fine. It is just routine estate stuff. I will be home for dinner. She drove home. She made pasta. She poured 2 glasses of wine. She asked Marcus about his day. She has said this was the hardest thing she has ever done in her life. Not the discovery, the dinner, sitting across from someone with a file folder of their betrayal in your memory and a glass of Chianti in your hand. She did it because she had 90 days, and she intended. The following morning, Diana returned to the law firm alone. She had told Marcus she had more paperwork. He had offered again to come. She had told him she would handle it. This time, she brought a notepad. She wrote down everything. Patricia Cho walked her through the full structure of the estate as Henry had built it. I want you to understand this structure. because it is the architecture of everything that happens next. Use every one of Henry Caldwell had structured his estate through a device called an irrevocable discretionary trust. Here is what that means in plain language. Once an irrevocable trust is created, it cannot be changed, amended, or reversed. The assets inside it are no longer considered the personal property of the person who created it. They belong to the trust. Henry had created this trust 17 years before he died, long before Marcus was in the picture, long before Diana had any idea what her father was worth. The trust named Diana as the sole beneficiary, not Diana and Marcus, not Diana's estate, Diana alone. It included a condition. For 90 days following Henry's death, the trust would remain in administration, meaning no distributions, no transfers, no access to any assets. On the 91st day, the trust would convert fully to Diana's direct ownership. At that point, under Ohio law, because the trust predated the marriage and was never commingled with marital assets, it would be entirely separate property. Marcus would have no legal claim. None. Henry had thought of that. Henry had thought of all of it. Diana asked Patricia Cho one question after the structure was fully explained. She asked, "What happens if Marcus files for divorce before day 91? Patricia Cho said, "The trust is unaffected. Divorce proceedings cannot reach trust assets that predate the marriage and were never commingled. He could file tomorrow. It would not change the outcome." Diana said, "But he does not know that." Patricia Cho looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "No, he does not." Diana wrote something on her notepad. Then she closed it. Then she asked Patricia Cho one more question. "Can I see the private investigator's full report?" The private investigator's report was 42 pages long. Gerald Fowler had been watching Marcus for 3 years. Not continuously, but on and off. Returning to the case every time Henry called him with a new concern. The report documented the following. Marcus and Morgan had met privately at 17 different locations over 2 years. Restaurants, hotels, twice at Morgan's apartment. The meetings were not accidental, they were scheduled. Marcus had accessed Diana's personal email account on 2 occasions, using her laptop while she was asleep. On both occasions, he accessed correspondence with her nonprofit's legal counsel regarding a property inheritance from a distant relative, a property Diana had mentioned to him once, and he had apparently not forgotten. Marcus had consulted with a financial specialist whose specific area of expertise was the division of inherited assets in divorce, and Marcus had, 3 times, to research the phrase irrevocable trust on the office computer of his financial advisory firm, a computer whose search history Gerald Fowler had legally obtained through a former employee contact. Marcus had been trying to understand what he might be dealing with about the Tuesday lunches and the 7-year-old truck and the philosophy on the inside cover of the notebook. And she thought, he built a fortress. The least I can do is stand inside it. She picked up her phone. She called Patricia Cho. She said, "I am going to wait all 90 days. Do not contact me unless something changes. I will contact you." Patricia Cho said, "Understood." Diana started her car. She drove home. She had 89 days to go. It well enough. Diana drove home from Whitmore, Hale and Associates on a Tuesday evening in March. She had been gone for 4 hours. She stopped at a grocery store on the way. She bought pasta, a jar of marinara, a bottle of red wine she knew Marcus liked. As she stood in the pasta aisle for a long time. Not because she couldn't decide, because she needed a moment that was only hers. A moment between the woman who had just read her father's letter and the woman who was about to walk through her own front door and pretend she was someone else. She bought the pasta, she drove home, she parked in the driveway, she sat in the car for 90 seconds. Then she picked up her purse, walked to the front door, and became for the first time a woman playing a role in her own life. Marcus was home when she arrived. He was on the couch, laptop open, reading what appeared to be a financial report. He looked up when she came in. He asked how the meeting went. Diana set the groceries on the counter. She said it was a lot to take in. She said the attorneys had gone through the estate documents. And she said her father had been more organized than she expected. All of this was true. None of it was the truth. Marcus asked if there was anything significant. Diana said she wasn't sure yet. She said it was complicated. She said she needed time to understand it all. Marcus said, of course. He said, take all the time you need. He said he was there whenever she wanted to talk through it. He said it the way a man says something he has rehearsed. Warm on the surface, something else underneath. Diana said, thank you. She started making the pasta. They ate dinner. He poured wine. He asked about her week. She asked about his. It was, by every visible measure, a normal evening between two people who had been married for 14 years. One of them was acting. It wasn't Marcus. That night, after Marcus fell asleep, Diana sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pen. She wrote the date at the top. She wrote Day 1. She wrote everything she remembered from the meeting with Catherine Whitmore. Every name, every figure, every condition, every detail from the private investigator's report that Henry had included in his letter. She was not writing it to remember. She already remembered everything. She was writing it because her father had taught her, by example, that the most important things are the things you can prove, not the things you know, the things you can show. She worked until 2 in the morning. Then she put the legal pad in a manila envelope, drove to the law firm's overnight drop box, and deposited it. She would do this 47 more times over the next 90 days. On day 12, Marcus suggested they meet with a financial planner. He said it casually, over breakfast, as if it had just occurred to him. He said that with everything going on, the estate, the attorneys, the complexity of it all, it might help to have someone who specialized in high-net-worth inheritance situations. He had a name. A man named Philip Garrett. He said Philip had helped several of his clients. Diana said that sounded sensible. She said she would call. She did call. She set up the meeting. She attended alone. Marcus had a work commitment. She brought a small digital recorder in the inside pocket of her blazer. Philip Garrett's specialty, it turned out, was not inheritance planning. It was marital asset transfer. Specifically, the legal structures by which one spouse can maximize their share of a newly inherited estate in the event of a divorce. Diana sat through the entire consultation. She asked exactly the questions a naive, grieving widow would ask. She smiled and nodded and took careful notes. Then she drove to the law firm and handed Catherine Whitmore the recording. Catherine added it to the file. On day 21, Diana met Morgan for coffee. This was not unusual. They had been having coffee together in the same rotating set of coffee shops near Diana's neighborhood for 15 years. Morgan had been attentive since Henry's death, checking in every day, sending flowers, sending food, showing up, all the things a best friend does. And Diana had received all of it with a warmth that was not entirely performed. Now, because here is the complicated truth about people who betray you. They do not stop being who they were just because of what they are doing. Morgan was still, in moments, the woman Diana had loved for 20 years. That made it worse, not better, worse. Let me tell you what Diana knew in the moment Morgan said those words. She knew that the phrase 90-day trust period is not a phrase a person uses casually. It is a specific legal term. It is not something you arrive at by general knowledge of estate law. It is something you are told by someone who knows. The only people who knew that term, the only people who knew that the estate had a 90-day holding condition, were Catherine Whitmore's team and Diana herself, and now Morgan, which meant Marcus, which meant that Marcus had a source inside the legal process, and or had obtained this information through some means Diana didn't yet understand, which meant the private investigator's report was right, which meant her father was right, which meant everything. Diana finished her coffee. She hugged Morgan goodbye on the sidewalk outside. She told her she loved her. She meant part of it. She sat in her car and called Catherine Whitmore. She said, "He has information about the trust." "I don't know how," Catherine said. "We'll find out." She did not cry until she was home, and then she cried for exactly 20 minutes in the upstairs bathroom with the water running so Marcus wouldn't hear. Then she washed her face, went downstairs. Started making 2 days later, Catherine Whitmore called Diana with the answer. Marcus had not had a source inside the firm. He had something more straightforward. 4 years earlier, Diana had added Marcus as an authorized contact on a minor investment account of hers, not her father's estate, her own account, worth about $60,000. Marcus had used that authorization, combined with a financial services inquiry through his own firm, to obtain a partial picture of Diana's financial landscape. He had then hired his own advisor, a woman named Sandra Cole, who specialized in estate intelligence, to piece together what he could about Henry's holdings. He hadn't gotten the full picture. He'd gotten enough. Enough to know there was a trust. Enough to know there was a time condition. Enough to brief Morgan. Catherine said, "He's been working this for at least 2 years, possibly longer." Diana said, "I know." She had known since her father's letter. But hearing it confirmed, out loud, by someone else's investigation, made it something different. It made it a fact. Facts can be used. Diana said, "Add it to the file." Catherine Diana spent the evening of day 23 reviewing her strategy with Catherine Whitmore by phone. She made one change. From that point forward, she would give Marcus what he expected. Not silence, not vagueness. Controlled information, small things that were true, said in ways that kept him confident he was ahead. Because a man who thinks he is winning stops watching the edges. And Diana had decided that the edges were where she lived now. Day 23, 67. Diana had noticed the phone 3 weeks earlier. Not the phone itself, the behavior around a phone. Marcus had always been on his phone. That was normal. He was in finance. Constant communication was part of his life. But Diana had noticed, starting in February, before her father died, that Marcus sometimes stepped outside to take calls. Not long calls, just a few minutes. And when he came back in, there would be a specific way he would set his phone on the counter, screen down. Deliberately, she had filed it, the way her father had filed things, without confronting, without accusing, just noting. On day 37, she found what the behavior was protecting Marcus was in the shower. Diana was putting away his dry cleaning. She reached into the inside pocket of his overcoat, the long gray one he wore to client meetings, and her hand closed around something that should not have been there. A phone. Not his phone. His phone was on the bathroom counter, and she could see the notification light blinking from where she stood. This phone was smaller, older model, a basic prepaid handset of the kind you buy at a drugstore for $40. Diana stood in the bedroom with the overcoat in one hand and the prepaid phone in the other. The shower was still running. She pressed the power button. The screen lit up. No lock code. She went to messages. There was one thread. Most of it had been deleted, but not all of it. One exchange remained. It to the file. The text message thread was between 2 numbers. One of them, the one that had been writing to Marcus, Diana recognized immediately. It was Morgan's number, not Morgan's listed number, a second number. But Diana knew the last 4 digits. Now, she had seen them on call logs before and assumed it was a work phone. The most recent exchange in the thread had been sent 11 days earlier. Morgan's message said, "How much longer?" Marcus's reply said, 53 days. That was all. 6 words. Diana read them twice. Then she photographed the screen with her own phone. Then she powered the prepaid phone off, put it back in the coat pocket, put the coat back on its hanger, hung it in the closet, and closed the closet door. The shower turned off. She was sitting on the edge of the bed reading a magazine when Marcus She cried that afternoon. Not at home. She drove to a Kroger supermarket 3 miles away. She parked on the second level of the parking garage. She sat in the car and she cried for exactly 20 minutes. Not because of Marcus. She had already accepted Marcus. She had accepted Marcus the moment she read her father's letter. She cried because of Morgan, because 53 days meant Morgan had known since before Henry died. It meant Morgan had been counting the days right alongside Marcus. It meant that every phone call since the funeral, every "how are you holding up" die, had been sent from a woman who already knew what was coming. 20 years, and Morgan had looked at those 20 years and decided they were worth less than whatever Marcus had promised her. Diana wiped her face. She drove to the law firm. She submitted the photograph. She drove home. She made pasta again. Day 37. 53 days remaining. Out of the bathroom. The next 50 days were a performance. Diana went to work. She came home. She made dinner. She asked Marcus how his day was. And she had coffee with Morgan twice more. She attended a dinner party. She smiled through it. She also met with Catherine Whitmore 7 times, submitted 14 additional documented observations, compiled a chronological timeline of Marcus's behavioral pattern going back 3 years, worked with the attorneys to prepare a preemptive legal brief for the moment Marcus filed. She did not sleep well. She lost 11 pounds. She ran every morning at 5 a.m. before Marcus woke up, not because she had always run, but because she needed somewhere to put what she was carrying that wasn't a parking garage. And then, on a Thursday morning, she woke up and looked at the calendar. Day 90. Tomorrow. 2 days after day 91, Marcus Alderman served Diana with divorce papers. He had waited, she realized later, because he had been told by his attorneys to wait until day 93. Far enough past 91 that it would not look like he had been counting the days. He served her at home, in the kitchen, on a Tuesday morning. He was professional about it, almost clinical, the kind of composure a man maintains when he believes he has won. He said he was sorry. He said this wasn't working anymore. He said he hoped they could be adults about it. He had a number. His attorneys had calculated what they believed the estate was worth in marital terms. His offer to Diana was $340 million, roughly 15% of the total estate value he believed existed. He said he thought that was fair. He said it with the confidence of a man who has done the math. Diana took the papers. She said she would have her attorney look at them. She was very polite about it. She was by that point 2 days into being one of the wealthiest private individuals in the state of Ohio. Marcus did not know that. He was about to find out. Day 91. Diana's response to Marcus's divorce filing was delivered through her attorneys 4 days later. It was 14 pages long. The opening paragraph stated, in precise legal language, that the entirety of the Caldwell estate was held in an irrevocable trust established prior to Diana's marriage by 22 years, converted to her sole ownership on day 91 following Henry Caldwell's death, and constituted under Ohio Revised Code separate property not subject to equitable distribution in any divorce proceeding. In other words, the estate was entirely hers. In every dollar of it. Marcus was entitled to none of it. Not 15%, not 1%, not $1. The remaining 13 pages contained the private investigator's report, the recording of the Philip Garrett consultation, the photograph of the prepaid phone screen, a sworn affidavit from Catherine Whitmore detailing Marcus's 2 unauthorized attempts to access estate documents, and a 47-page chronological log of documented behaviors. Diana's midnight drives to the drop box, every entry on every legal pad, every observation, every date, every fact. Henry had said, build the fortress. Diana had built it, stone by stone, over 90 days, and then she had closed the gate. Marcus's attorney, a man named Robert Crane, were one of the most expensive divorce litigators in Ohio, called Marcus at 2:17 in the afternoon on the day he received Diana's counterfiling. We do not know exactly what was said on that call. What we know is that it lasted 11 minutes. What we know is that Marcus, by multiple accounts, left his office shortly after and did not return that day. What we know is that Robert Crane, within 10 days of receiving that filing, withdrew from the case. His withdrawal letter cited, in standard legal language, irreconcilable conflicts, which is attorney language for the situation where the client's case has become untenable and the attorney no longer wishes to be associated with it. Marcus was left without representation, and he was left with a divorce filing that had just been answered by 14 pages of evidence his team had not anticipated. He was left to understand what Diana had understood 93 days earlier, that the math had never worked, that the door had been closed before he arrived, that the man he had underestimated most was not Diana. It was her father. If this were a different kind of story, this would be the ending. Diana wins. Marcus loses. Cut to credits. not typically take cases that have become criminal referrals. The risk to their own reputation is too high. The attorney Marcus eventually retained was competent, but significantly less experienced than either of his predecessors. He was also significantly cheaper, which meant Marcus was running out of something other than arguments. He was running out of money. Because Marcus Alderman's personal finances, separate from anything related to Diana, were not what they appeared. We'll come back to that. David Harlow, Marcus's second attorney, the aggressive media strategist, withdrew from the case 9 days after the criminal referral was filed. His withdrawal letter was brief. He cited a change in the scope of the matter, which was attorney language for, "This is no longer a divorce case, and I am not a criminal defense attorney." Marcus was now looking for his third attorney in 4 months. His pool of candidates had narrowed considerably. High-profile divorce attorneys do not typically take cases that have become criminal referrals. The risk to their own reputation is too high. The attorney Marcus eventually retained was competent, but significantly less experienced than either of his predecessors. He was also significantly cheaper, which meant Marcus was running out of something other than arguments. He was running out of money. Because Marcus Alderman's personal finances, separate from anything related to Diana, were not what they appeared. We'll come back to that. And the formal divorce hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in the Domestic Relations Division of the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas. Diana had been preparing for it for 4 months, not just legally, every way. She had reviewed every document in the 14-page counterfiling. She had sat through mock cross-examinations with her legal team. She had rehearsed her answers until they were honest, precise, and completely unshakable. She had also done something else, something her attorneys had not asked for and had not expected. She had written a statement, not for the court, not for the press, for herself. 1 page, handwritten, on the same legal pad she had been using since day one. At the top, she wrote her father's quote, "Money that is seen becomes a target. Money that is invisible becomes a fortress. Hey, build the fortress." Below it, she wrote 1 line of her own. "I built it, Dad. It held." The night before the hearing, Diana drove to the cemetery where Henry was buried. It was early evening, still light. She stood at his grave for about 10 minutes. She did not speak. She did not cry. She had said everything she needed to say in that 1 handwritten line. She drove home. She made tea. She went to bed at 9:30. She slept for 7 hours. It was the first full night of sleep she had gotten since March. In the morning, she put on a navy blazer, small gold earrings, no other jewelry. She drove to the courthouse. She was 18 minutes early. She sat in the hallway outside the courtroom and thought about her father eating lunch at a diner on a Tuesday. She thought about how much she still didn't know about him, and how much she understood that she hadn't before. Then the bailiff opened the courtroom door, and Diana Caldwell walked in. You saw this room at the beginning. Diana at the plaintiff's table, navy blazer, small gold earrings, 2 people on the opposite side of the room whose backs we did not show you. We showed you Diana's face. We told you she looked like a woman who had already won. Now you know why. She had been in this room before, not this literal room, but this position. She had been here every night for 90 days, in the kitchen, at the table, on the legal pads, in the parking garages. She had already lived this moment 100 times. Today was just the day she got to. The hearing opened at 9:22 in the morning. Diana's lead attorney, a woman named Grace Okafor, whom Catherine Whitmore had recommended specifically for this proceeding, opened with a statement that took 11 minutes to deliver, and that the opposing team did not interrupt once. She began with the trust structure. She explained without embellishment how it had been built, when and why. She cited the specific provisions of the Ohio Revised Code that made the estate entirely outside the scope of marital property. Then she moved to the evidence. She placed, 1 by 1, each item on the table before the judge: the private investigator's report, the recording of the Philip Garrett consultation, the photograph of the prepaid phone screen, the sworn affidavit from Catherine Whitmore, the documented behavioral log, 47 pages, every date, every observation, every fact. She said, "Your Honor, while what you have before you is not a complicated case, it is a very simple one. A man married a woman. He spent 4 years investigating her father's wealth. He coordinated with her closest friend to time his exit for maximum financial gain. He failed. Not because of luck, not because of legal technicality, because Diana Caldwell's father saw it coming 14 years ago and spent every day since making sure it would not succeed. The estate is hers. It was always hers. This proceeding exists only to confirm what the law already says." She sat down. The Marcus's third attorney, a man named Paul Seward, competent, underprepared, opened by arguing that the trust structure had been constructed with intent to defraud a spouse. He cited 3 legal precedents. Diana's team had anticipated all 3. That Grace Okafor responded to each in turn, citing counter-precedents and specific provisions of Ohio estate law that rendered Marcus's argument inapplicable. Seward then argued that Marcus had contributed substantially to the marriage over 14 years and deserved equitable consideration. Grace noted that equitable consideration applies to marital property. The estate was not marital property. Therefore, there was nothing to distribute equitably. Seward argued that the private investigator's report had been obtained without Marcus's knowledge and should be excluded. Grace pointed out that the PI had been hired by Henry Caldwell before his death, that Henry was not a party to the divorce, and that the evidence had been properly introduced through the estate's legal record. The exclusion argument failed. Seward was running out of arguments. He had started with 3. He had none left. The judge looked at him. She said, "Do you have anything further, counselor?" Paul Seward said, "We would like to call Marcus Alderman to testify." Grace Okafor did not object. She wanted Marcus on the stand. She had wanted that for months. Was very Marcus Alderman took the stand at 11:07 in the morning. He was still good on the stand. Some people are. They have a quality of surface composure that holds under ordinary questioning. Seward walked him through the marriage. 14 years, shared life, deep commitment. Marcus was warm, believable. The performance was good. Then Grace Okafor stood up. She approached the stand. She had a single page in her hand. She placed it face down on the rail. She looked at Marcus. She said, "Mr. Alderman, I have one question before we move to the documentary evidence." Marcus said, "Of course." She said, "On the 37th day following Henry Caldwell's death, did you send a text message from a prepaid mobile device reading the words, quote, 53 days, end quote, in response to a message from an individual asking, quote, how much longer, end quote?" The courtroom was silent. Marcus looked at his attorney. Seward gave a very small nod. Marcus said, "Yes." Grace Okafor said, "Thank you." She sat down. She did not ask another question. She did not need to, because what Marcus had just confirmed, under oath, on the record, in a court of law, was that he had been counting the days until Diana's father's estate could be accessed, that he had shared that count with a woman who was not his wife, that the entire marriage, in its final chapter, had been a waiting game, and that he had, on the 37th day of his wait, told Morgan Ellis there were 53 more to go. 6 words, under oath, done. It out. There was one more revelation in the hearing, the one I told you we would come back to, Marcus's personal finances. In the course of the legal proceedings, Diana's attorneys had subpoenaed Marcus's personal financial records. What they found was this: Marcus Alderman was not wealthy. He had, over the previous 6 years, accumulated personal debt of approximately $1.4 million, bad investments, a failed business venture, a lifestyle maintained well beyond his means. He had been, for half a decade, living on credit while waiting for Henry Caldwell to die. He had not married Diana because he loved her. He had not stayed because he cared. He had stayed because he needed her, or rather, he needed what he believed was going to come to him through her. And when it didn't, when the door that Henry had closed remained closed, Marcus was left with exactly what he had brought to the marriage: debt, and a plan that had failed. The judge took 40 minutes to deliberate. When she returned, she read her ruling in 12 minutes. The trust structure was valid. The estate was separate property. Marcus was entitled to no portion of it. The counterclaim for attempted fraud on a fiduciary was noted in the record and formally referred to the Ohio Attorney General for further investigation. All legal fees incurred by Diana in defense of the estate were to be paid by Marcus Alderman. The judge then did something that judges rarely do. She paused. She looked at the room. She said, "The court is aware that this case has been conducted in part through public channels. The record now speaks for itself. Court is adjourned." She stood. Everyone stood. The bailiff opened the side door. The judge walked out. Diana sat for a moment. Grace Okafor put a hand on her shoulder. Diana said, "Thank you." She stood. She gathered her things. She walked out of the courtroom, into the hallway, into the light, alone. The way 3 months after the hearing, Diana was still working through her father's files, not the box in the study. That was long processed. A second set of files, stored at the law firm, part of the sealed record Henry had left with Whitmore, Hale, had been released to Diana following the conclusion of the divorce proceedings. She went through them alone. At the law firm. In the same conference room where she had first learned her father was worth $2 billion. Near the bottom of the second box, she found a manila folder. Inside the folder, a 40-page document. The logo at the top was the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. It was a settlement agreement, dated 2008, marked confidential. The subject of the settlement, Marcus Alderman. In 2008, 3 years before Diana met Marcus, he had been a junior partner at a financial services firm in Cincinnati. The firm had been investigated by the SEC for client account manipulation. Marcus had been named as a participant, not the principal. A participant. The case had been settled. No charges were filed. The settlement was confidential, and Henry Caldwell had the file. "Father, let me walk you through the timeline. In 2008, Marcus Alderman settles with the SEC confidentially. No one outside the firm knows. The record is sealed. 2009, Diana meets Marcus at a charity gala. She brings him home for Sunday dinner. She introduces him to her father. Henry shakes Marcus's hand. He smiles. He says it is nice to meet him. That night, or within days of that night, Henry calls someone. We don't know who. An investigator, almost certainly. Someone who knew how to find things that were supposed to stay hidden. Within weeks, Henry has the SEC file. He reads it. He does not tell Diana. 2011, Diana and Marcus marry. Henry is at the wedding. He gives a toast. The toast, by Diana's account, was warm and genuine. He wished them both happiness, but he had already started building the fortress. Not in 2018 when he hired Gerald Finch. Not in 2017 when Marcus asked about estate planning. In 2009. When he shook Marcus Alderman's hand for the first time and already knew who he was shaking hands, have people who hear this story ask the same question. Why didn't Henry tell Diana? He had the SEC file. He had 12 years to use it. He could have told her before the wedding. He could have told her at any point during the 14 years of marriage. Why didn't he? I think there are 2 answers. The first is the one Henry wrote himself. It is her choice to make. Henry Caldwell had watched men with money and power control the choices of the people around them for his entire adult life. He had found it contemptible. He would not do it to his daughter, even to protect her. The decision about Marcus was Diana's to make, not his. The second answer is harder. and I think it is the truer one. Henry Caldwell had spent his life being right about people. He had built a $2 billion empire by reading people correctly across a table, and he had watched his daughter, this woman he loved more than anything he had ever built. Look at Marcus Alderman and be happy. Genuinely. Completely happy. And Henry Caldwell, the man who trusted nothing and no one, had decided that his daughter's happiness was worth more than his certainty. So he had said nothing. And he had built the walls higher. And he had waited. And when the time came, when Marcus finally showed his hand, Henry was ready. He had always been ready. He just hoped for 14 years that he would never have to be with. Here is where everyone ended up. Diana Caldwell. She sold her marital home 6 months after the hearing. She moved into a smaller house, a farmhouse actually, in Wayne County, Ohio, 12 miles from where Henry grew up. She still runs the literacy nonprofit. She declined the offer to step down when the story became public. She stayed, because she had always stayed. She now also chairs the board of the Caldwell Rural Education Foundation. The foundation has, since its public announcement, received donations from across the country. People who heard the story, people who wanted to be part of what Henry built. The foundation's scholarship program has been renamed. It is now called the Henry James Caldwell Scholarship. His name is on something. Finally. He would have hated it. Diana did it anyway. Marcus Alderman. The Ohio Attorney General's office formally indicted Marcus on 2 counts of wire fraud related to the unauthorized estate intelligence operation. His trial is pending. He was ordered to pay Diana's legal fees, a figure in excess of $800,000. His personal debt, already at $1.4 million, now exceeds $2 million. He is representing himself. Morgan Ellis. She moved to Portland, Oregon. She works in marketing. Her social media is private. She has not spoken publicly about any of this. Diana has not spoken to her. She has been asked, in private, whether she thinks about Morgan. She said, "Every day. Less than yesterday. More than I'd like." I want to tell you what I think this story is about. Not the money, not the divorce, not even the betrayal. I think it is about the way some people love. Quietly, structurally, without announcement. Henry Caldwell never sat his daughter down and told her he loved her in the language most people use. He didn't leave her letters that said, "Diana, you are the most important thing I have ever built." He built a fortress instead. He hired a private investigator. He restructured $2 billion. He wrote a letter that named names and attached 47 pages of documentation. That was his love language. Precision, preparation, protection. I think about the men in my own life who love like that. The ones who don't say much but show up. The ones who are already thinking 3 moves ahead of a problem you haven't told them about yet. We don't always recognize that kind of love when it is happening. We sometimes don't understand it until it is already done. Until the fortress has held and the door is closed and we're standing on the right side of it, wondering when exactly it was built. Henry built it every day, for 40 years, for her, and she never knew, until she needed to. Which is, I think, exactly I want to leave you with 3 questions. Not to answer them, just to carry them. The first, how many people in your life are building something for you right now that you don't know about? The second, what would you do with 90 days and the knowledge that betrayal was coming? The third, and this one I think about most. Henry Caldwell had the SEC file. He had 12 years. He had the money and the means to end the marriage before it cost Diana anything. He chose not to, because it was her choice to make. Was he right? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But I know that Diana, who knows the full truth now, who has read every page of every file, who sat alone in a deposition room for 5 minutes and cried for a man she thought she already knew. Diana says yes. She says her father was right. And she says she would not change a single thing he did. I believe her. I think you do too. That's the story. All of it. If it stayed with you, if there is someone in your life you are going to think about differently after watching this, then it did what I hoped it would do. There are more stories like this one. Stories about people who are extraordinary in ways that are quiet and invisible and only visible in the end. We'll be back with another one. Take care of the people who are building fortresses for you. And if you are the one building, keep going. But they'll understand it when they need to.